This weekend as a whole hasn't gone exactly the way I thought it was going to, and that's okay. I have to start making some some consolation in the fact that life is going to choose the path that it goes. And I thought about that through the better part of today. I went out shopping for a little bit, had kind of a scare this morning. This is for the diabetics out there. I'm talking to you directly. Never skimp on what kind of things you're getting. I had a bunch of testing strips. You know how you do the old finger prick thing and then you got to put the blood on there and read it. And I have a Vario One Touch, I believe is mine. It's quite a few years old. And it was kind of a 1-2 punch. I had woken up and I had a small sort of meal and nothing real sugary, nothing that I knew of. Now, the night prior, if you all recall, I talked about having gone out and had a good meal and all this other sort of things. And I think because the place was a little understaffed and they were rushing around, I had kept requesting specifically for a Coke Zero, but I think they kept bringing me a normal one. I thought, okay, no worry, I'll be fine. But one of the side effects of just being overworked, overstressed, all of this sort of thing, just really overwhelmed. I can't really put a singularity on that, is that I'm also getting really forgetful. And I didn't take any of the metformin that I'm supposed to take. Now, for those of you that aren't diabetic, metformin is a pill that you can take. Some diabetics, type 2 diabetics, will take to keep your sugar level pretty nominal. And when I'm doing really well, I can keep my sugar level with medication and almost no activity right around 110 or so. And I had a really weird, horrifying number show up earlier. And at one point, it climbed up as high as, I think, 245, 277 in there. I didn't know what was going on. And I thought, okay, is it that the needle has something wrong? Did I not wash my hands? Did I touch something and it's giving a false reading? I didn't feel weird, but you know that thing that happens whenever you think you've got something wrong and then you're not sure. And so everything that feels just even a little bit off is suddenly you're on the edge of a precipice, like, oh shit, is something wrong? And like all these things start going through my head. But I was grateful that I had enough of a mindset to go, all right, chill for a second, think this through. It's not that big of a deal. It'll be okay. It's not going to be a problem. Don't freak out, right? And I just noticed there's something I have to erase on my artwork while I'm looking at it. So and I had been feeling a little bit under the weather, and just this kind of the temperature in Missouri is fluctuating so much that it's just terrible, right? Just trying to stay okay. And so, like it's freezing again once again down here in the studio, and is what it is. Nonetheless, I was freaking out about the sugar reading, and I was like, okay, well, this is not great. I did multiple readings and I thought, I need to double check. And sure enough, the testing strips, like anything having to do with medical testing, had long since expired. So I thought, okay, great. I know from what I've read before that once they start to expire, they can do all kinds of things. They can read in your machine wrong. I had no idea if this was a real reading or not. So I decided I'm going to take a precaution, and I'm going to take my total daily amount, which is about 1,000 milligrams of it, take it real quickly, see how that goes. And I wasn't feeling weird. I wasn't sweating. There wasn't anything weird going on. So I thought, okay, maybe there's something wrong there. And I decided I'm going to give myself one more test on it. I went through a round of about 3 or 4 tests, and then the battery lights started going off. So I was like, okay, so maybe something's wrong there. And immediately right there, as things are going wrong, of course, the panic starts to set in the back of my head. And I'm thinking, what if something's really wrong? What if I can't step back from this? What if I'm right now witnessing the change of my lifestyle and my diet for the worst? What if my health is taking, a spiral downward? And that doesn't help other things, blood pressure, whatever. But I still stayed, okay, you know what? And I went and got batteries. I went and managed to find testing strips for the machine I had. I had first gone to Walgreens and then I went to CVS. Thank goodness CVS had it for much cheaper. But like all things, I ended up finding out after doing some searching, it is much cheaper on Amazon. So I'll be ordering that in the next few weeks. I got enough for 30 days for right now, and that's good enough. And I remember thinking to myself when I was going through that, like, man, I'm feeling ill-prepared, and there's just so many things that aren't working right. And then after that, well, actually, well before that, I had gone to another store to kind of check to see if there was anything there, any kind of, testing strips or anything. And it's a place that will often sell a lot of reclaimed things. And I've talked about it before, called Cargo Largo. Occasionally they carry things like that there. I've found them in the past and never bought them. But I ended up finding two things that I was going to talk about. And I'll probably end up doing, maybe one of them I'm going to do a small book review. It's one of the other things I do on here. This one is Dinosaur Philosophy. And you guys have probably seen the comic strips of this. I forget exactly who it is that does this. It's published through HarperCollins and written by James Stewart and illustrated by Kay Romey. And it's a beautiful little hardbound book. There's a lot of new ones in here I'd never seen before. But I picked this up because this is similar to a format I would love to do with one of my own things. I know that this is a much more mass-produced book, but this is freaking gorgeous. I love this. And so I picked this up for $5 today. And then this is something I really wanted. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I understand, after having talked about marketing, that most people would be like, wait, well, you picked up that book? There's a reason. So I had listened to a podcast that had talked about this thing called the Breathe Self-Care Journal. Now, I already have multiple journals that I'm doing, including this this recorded one with video and audio. But I found this one, and I understand that the marketing is very much from an aesthetic point of view and everything. It is marketed. It's released by Sterling of New York, I believe, and it is marketed very much toward a feminine angle, but I don't care about that. So this is the book. Now, I enjoy the graphic design involved in it and everything, but it's the contents inside of this wonderful book. When you get in there, I don't know how much I can show you in here, and I don't want to do a B-roll, but there is a bunch of different areas in here, and it's styled in a different sort of way. It's got a lot of inspirational quotes. It's got things about talking about detoxing and self-care, and I'll basically read you the table of contents. In search of balance, slowly does it. Make yourself right at home. Create your own mental health first aid kit. Wide awake and worried. Lend a hand. Mind how you grow. Detox. An open look at problems. Remains of the day. Why bother? One word. Crafting a better state of mind. Smarter connection. Time to reflect. Let's dance. Fiction and a flash. Yoga for self-care. And there's a multitude of things throughout where basically they'll run you through the planning stages and then filling in the blanks on challenges and aspects to make this experience going through this journal very much your own. But I love that it has the prompts, and the Hero's Journal is similar in form and function to this, but this one goes a different route from what the reviews were saying, where it gave you more of an inclination to complete a story of yourself, but with enough differential throughout it that it isn't the same thing over and over again. And so I'm really excited to get started on that. Speaking of personal homework, one of the things that came courtesy of a therapist is, and you guys that are in therapy have probably heard of this damn thing. So this is the Self-Therapy Workbook, an exercise book for the IFS process. And this one covers a lot of things. I started looking in here and I thought to myself, oh shit. There's a lot of reading. There's a lot of different things. It covers everything from, just everything from like assigning like whenever you're in therapy. And I want to preface this by saying I'm not a therapist and I'm not offering any sort of real credible information on this, just my own experience and what I'm holding here in my hand. And just sort of a thought process review of it. That's it, nothing more. This one basically talks about everything from protectors to exiles to the inner child in different formats and ways. There's a multitude of steps that you go through in this to complete it. And it also has like 3 MP3 downloads for meditation, downloadable exercise pages, so that if you need more, there's more there you can pull from it. So that's something I'm starting this week as well too. Part of this has begun because, quite frankly, I'm just overwhelmed all the time now, and there has to be somewhere in there that this breaks down for me, that I can maintain some level of understanding, if not control. I don't think I'm going to be capable of getting the control factor that I want in there, but I'm hoping that I'm at least able to overcome that aspect. That's at least where I'm at with that. So beyond that, I had 2 things that I was going to try and find, and I know I had stored them away, and I don't know where I put them. One of them was a shelf that I had made years and years ago. In fact, so the whole subject of this is shop class. And I just thought I was going to reminisce a little bit about that, because I realize that as an adult, there's a lot of things that, and maybe I'm the outlier on this, but please feel free to let me know if you guys can relate on this or not. When I was growing up, I had a lot of ideas of what it was going to be like to be an adult. The biggest one was, I can do what I want, when I want, how I want, where I want. Now, that turns out not to be completely true. But the main thing I remember was that a lot of my life lessons of that came about when I was taking shop class, which I'm not sure if that's still offered, if that is a thing in high school. I don't actually know that. But I do remember that was the very first time I had freedom to develop a self-reliance that I didn't really have before. I was getting some of that in Boy Scouts, which is true, right? Going camping, building fires, cooking, learning how to be a quartermaster, how to be a good leader, interpersonal communication, camping adventures, all that stuff was phenomenal. Shop class became a whole nother thing where I fell in love with tools and creating, and it really underscored and fed a growing fascination with, well, if I can't find it, I will invent it or build it or create it out of whatever I can find on hand and make it work for me. And there's a lot of things. In fact, this camera, my phone, is mounted onto a small camera arm that is mounted onto an extension that was meant for a desk to hold cameras, that is mounted to another expanding arm that is drilled into the ceiling. Now, I waited to install this thing until after I had basically everything else set up, but all of this had been in the plans whenever I was planning this entire studio, from the shelving to the spacing to the ceiling design, this table built from a spare door in the house. All of that stuff came together, and I wouldn't have been able to do that stuff if I hadn't taken, and I think if I remember right, I ended up taking 3 years of shop class over and over and over again, because I think they had 4 years of it, but in my freshman year, I didn't take it. So it was the very first time I was allowed to mess with things like band saws and all this other stuff. And one of the first things I did was, now thinking about it, there were 3 projects I made. The first one, horrendous. It was supposed to be a magazine holder, and it is dense enough and heavy enough that you could assault an elephant with it and probably do some damage before the elephant killed you. But it is this big honking thing made of, like, I think it's 3/4 inch, not pine. It's got to be walnut or something, because we used a lot of scraps that would come in from the lumber yards. And I was like, I love the look of this. And I proceeded to stain it this horrendous color, like layers of it on there. And I couldn't get it to work right. And my cuts weren't straight. Things that now seem fairly obvious to me in woodworking, back then were just like, I don't get why it's not working. Like, I didn't take into consideration my hand shifting it, not locking down the wood warpage, the thickness of the blade, yada, yada, yada. Well, there was that, and then I built 2 shelves. One that I still have that was from basically a kit. They sent you, like, the patterns, and you would, draw out all the patterns and then go, oh, I'm going to router this and all this other stuff and cut out these other areas. And that one turned out okay. And then I have a really good one that one was also, all the wood was sent ahead of time for that one, where there was the basic general shapes, but then you had to cut it out and customize it from there. That one is still, thankfully, hanging in my parents' house, and they still use it all the time. It was like kind of a coat rack kind of thing with a shelf on top. And I loved it. And it was interesting because I might have been, it was in my sophomore year, But that was in Noster, Missouri, a tiny little town, not that far from Whiteman Air Force Base. And then when I was in Warrensburg, Missouri, which is just a town 10 miles over or so, I loved shop class there. And in both of those circumstances, when I took shop, I really enjoyed how much I was learning. My first teacher that I had, Mr. Brockman, was an excellent source of knowledge about tools and the history. And I would always ask him things like, what's the oldest tool you have in here? And what is this? And I can remember it was really funny one time. He asked me if I wanted an 8th hour. And I thought I had annoyed him. And he was like, no. He's like, it'll give you an opportunity to be here on site because the shop class isn't, the whole shop isn't available after hours normally. But I can put something in saying you simply want some extra time to be able to work on a project, which people could do that, but you weren't given that much time afterward, like a half hour. So if I was given an 8th hour, I'd be given a full hour after class. So I told my parents what happened. They were upset at first, and they were like, "What? You get in trouble? What'd you do?" And I was like, "No." And I showed them this permission note, and he explained it on there. And my mom thought it was kind of odd. My dad was like, "That's really weird. I mean, why?" And because he was never really somebody who was into doing a whole bunch of handiwork stuff, but I was developing that, and so. I remember I worked with DeWalt, Milwaukee, but I fell in love with Hitachi tools. And to this day, like you've probably noticed that in a lot of different things that I've posted online, everything I own is Hitachi or Metabo. That's the new name it goes under. I love the tools. And the very first power tool I bought for myself when I was 16, it was my first paycheck from Little Caesars. And I could not wait because I had seen one go on sale at Lowe's, and I was super excited. And I didn't know much about it. I just knew I wanted this power drill. It had a NiCad battery. It was 14.4 volt, and I was really excited about it. I went and bought it, and it had been on clearance. And when I got in there, they had it marked even lower. So I was like, "That's amazing." The guy that sold it to me was really excited. He was like, "Oh, it's your first power tool. That's amazing, man. That's wonderful." Because I told him the whole thing, and I was one of those people that, just like now, I'm kind of an over-explainer. And, that was really cool. I was really happy about that. I was like, all right, cool. That's sweet. I'm gonna have this tool, and I'm gonna go do things with it. And I don't know what the hell I thought I was gonna do with it, because not like I had a whole bunch of projects, lined up or something like that. And honestly, the weird part about it too is, in my family, this is gonna be a little bit of an inside look into my family, but growing up, I wasn't allowed in the kitchen, and I sure as hell wasn't allowed to build or work on anything. And it was kind of a crushing thing. It truncated a lot of my own ability to explore things and stuff. So whenever wood projects came up, like anything for scouts or volunteer stuff, I jumped at the chance, man, just to work with, nails, screws, hammers, like joinery, any of that stuff. I couldn't help it. Now there's a reason for all that, and maybe in a much later episode, I'll have some of the bravery to go into why that exactly was, because it's some pretty harsh shit. But the point is that after that, I was really happy because I had been given an opportunity that I could get my own tools and get my own things, and I still own all of my tools. Now the NiCad battery has long since given up its ghost, and I really need to turn that one in, and I've replaced it with a Metabo, and I still have the original drill gun though and everything, and because I can't get rid of that. It's my first tool. But I remember how much that class meant to me, because when we were in there, it was something that as I've gotten older, and I've had discussions with some people about this before, how many of you weren't told exactly what the things were you were going to have to do when you get older? I mean, we all grow up and have a house. It's that whole kind of thing that like the boomer generation would tell us, like, well, I got a house when I was 24 and I paid for college. And it's like, and then when you start to read between the lines, you're like, wait a minute, college used to be free, or it was reduced, or, there was a bunch of other stuff, and houses only cost like $3,000. Your car was $1,000. Now, I understand that inflation and all these other numbers and things can play tricks on us, but when you look at it, ratio per ratio, and adjust for that, they still had it a lot easier than us. And the world was a very different place. So going back to the shop class thing, one of the things I really enjoyed about it was understanding that if you wanted things to last, you took care of them. And I learned how to keep my tools going. I will often look for tools on clearance, but I also look for tools I want, that I need, or that I can envision will come in handy, because I like to be able to get projects done efficiently and correctly with no shortcuts. Now, part of that also is because of the fact that I know that with a limited income as an artist, what I get is what I, need to hold on to as long as I can. And I expect it to be able to perform very well for me for a long time. But one of the things I didn't realize was that it's not just the tools you get in life, it's everything. And this was best administered and in this crazy moment where we were talking about the shop vacs. Now, there was 2 ways to clean in shop class. The first one was you had to put on a mask and you had to get the air hose and you were to brush off or blow off all of the external dust that was in the harder to reach areas that you couldn't reach with the shop vac. So we're blowing stuff all around, everything else that gets everywhere. Now, one of the dangers with that, and he relied on us to be very careful because this did happen. He said, if anyone is working with the welder or anything heat derived that will create a spark, we will have a flash fire in here. And we did. We had a small one, and it was horrifying. And it is a memory I am probably never going to forget. It happened so quickly, so fast. And the only way I can describe it that I remember personally, I know people have said that's really weird, but it did. It was like singed hair, burnt wood, and a weird absence of being able to breathe. And it happened not very close to me. It was like this bright flash and it was over in a second. But we were told to be really careful about things. And that was sort of the first time that I thought, because when you're growing up, when you're in high school, I don't know about you guys, but I tried to pay attention to a lot of things, and I was kind of different in the fact that I was so focused in on things that I tried very hard to listen and understand, but I still had a lot of what my parents' expectations and explanations of living life and what it was going to be like in my head. And there was a point where we were going over how to clean up the shop, and he had made a point of saying, whenever you're done, make sure you're cleaning your tools as well too. And he was specifically talking about the shop vac, about emptying it out, checking the filter, making sure the hose was clear, winding up the cord, and not pulling it out of the wall by the rest of the cord, by grabbing the head firmly and pulling it out and not wiggling it out so we don't cause any issues with the prongs getting bent or anything within the outlet. And there was a kid who echoed what a lot of us thought. I have to clean it? Now, I think at that point, my teacher didn't show alarm, but it was more just, I can't believe it. And he said, yes, that's what you're supposed to do. He's like, it's like anything. Now, my class was comprised of 8 boys and 2 young ladies that were, I believe, either of Indian or Hispanic descent. I don't know. I don't remember. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is because it was, the late 80s and people were still weird about stuff like that. And for some reason, I don't know why, but that just colors the whole circumstance that was in there. They thought they were my sisters and all this other stuff. And I think it turned out that they were from India, but, similar skin tones and that sort of thing. And so, people generalize. But that all colored how we were reacting to each other and what it was like in there. But the majority of these other boys were either military kids or, kids that had grown up around Knob Noster. And Mr. Brockman was like, yeah, you clean your tools. If you want them to last, if you want to be able to depend on them, if you want them to work, if you want to save time. Because then he broke it down. And I mean, that class was insane what we learned over the course of a year. We learned everything from a little bit of cabinetry to how to work with wood, to how we would work with certain bonding agents and glues, why mask respirators would work and why they didn't work, how terrible drywall could actually be for you, why you don't use vacuum cleaners unless you want them to break down or you have an extremely specific filter system for drywall dust. There's just all these things he covered. And he even to the point to where, like, how there's the vents on drills and things. He was like, you could operate if it's in a high dust area or there's some moisture outside or something, you want to protect your tool. wrap it with a couple of sponges, really thin sliced sponges, put some rubber bands around it, and you can run your tool for a while. But it still needs air, so you don't want to completely cover it. We got all of these bits of input that now that I'm thinking moving forward, I've met people that maybe don't know how to change a tire, or they don't know the first thing about stuff. And I'm not saying everyone should be mechanically inclined or know how to use tools or anything. I'm not saying that. But it is interesting to see how, even moving forward, there's a lot of times that people will look back and we focus on the negative aspects of what happened to us when we were younger. That's certainly why I'm in therapy. But one of the things I don't always do is remember the really cool things that I learned moving forward and how it affects you later in life. Now, there were two more things I was going to show you, but one of them is in a case that I can't get to at the moment because I got some other stuff piled in front of it. So I'll eventually show it on one of these journals. And then the other one is also stored away with the shelf that I was going to show you. I did not plan very well for this. In fact, I had to bump one subject to get this one up moving forward. So the item that I had made was, and I've shown this before on some of the other social media sites I'd had, because I finally found it. I didn't think I had it anymore. I made a soldering iron. One of the options we had, and I was ecstatic when I had a chance to learn this, you could get the parts component kits, but I couldn't afford that. And I really, really wanted to make one. And it was frustrating because, you know, just a lot of reasons went into why I wasn't able to afford it. But I didn't get any help from my parents on that. I think times were tight or whatever. And I remember my school teacher was like, you know, how about we do it this way? He's like, I can't facilitate one, the school won't allow it, but if I order parts, spare parts, and I give you these plans, if you come in for an 8th hour and you find some parts scattered around, you're more than welcome to them. Sure enough, he had left a lot of stuff out. And some of the things I had to get really creative with. We had a vacuum forming table. It was the very first time I'd ever seen something like this. And it allowed me to be able to, and it was crazy because when I say vacuum form, that's the easiest way I can possibly say this, but it was, we had these plastic sheets that you could, what I did was I took half of one part of a molded section of a drill, and I put these components together and I shaped the shell of it. It wasn't big enough. There was a lot of problems I ran across, but I took a simple light switch that you had to hold down to let the electricity run. And then I made this long bent area, and I even mounted a light down here by the trigger point so I could see what I was soldering. Super crude. And now if you were to look at it, you go, oh, that's kind of weird and steampunky. But no, it's very 16-punky is what it was. And I really enjoyed that a lot. I'm trying to find a big enough shadow box to put it in because it's one of my prides and joy from being a kid. And I can never thank him enough, my teacher, Mr. Brockman, for being nice enough to let me have a chance at building it. Because the other option was to do some other projects. And I was like, I really want to make this. I would really like to do this. Now, the cord came from a lamp. And I mean, there was just a lot of things that were really dodgy, and I had to be looking at how it was going to work electrically. And that's always been a weak point of mine. I'm not great with anything electrical. In fact, I've shocked myself so many times, you know, not even counting cattle fences, that I have a healthy respect for that sort of thing. Even a buddy of mine who's an electrician who works hot whenever he's doing stuff scares the shit out of me. I'm like, you're going to cash it in someday, dude. So nonetheless, I get all the parts together. I start putting this thing together, and I'm drilling holes for it to be able to vent out the heat. But I coil wound that bastard. So I had found some copper to make everything out of it. And I was like, because I knew copper was a good conductor and all these other things and how it was going to work. What I did not take into consideration was how hot the coiling system was going to get in there, and how the two clamshells that were now screwed together were going to hold. And when I put this damn thing together and I plugged it in, it got hot. And I don't know if it's because it's wired wrong or just because of the way I built it and how tight the shell was around it, but it started to melt things. And I guess, you know, when it's an interesting take on how things work when you're younger, and you'll remember these moments later on how you'll work on something that really needs the finesse in that moment. So I'll get to that here in a minute. So when I turned it on, it seemed to work. I was starting to solder. It was really clunky, but man, everyone was like, oh, it's awesome. You got the light in there and all this other stuff. And the handle was totally not ergonomic. It was really heavy. It was just an odd shaped thing. And where I had the cord placement was very odd. And you can tell I had to cut down the extra flashing from the shape of it. It was really weird, but it worked. And it was a fucking great memory. And then the part after that was, I was like, I ran it 2 or 3 times. I can't run it again. Even if I were to do it today, I might have a fucking house fire. So I don't want to do that. Fast forward sometime later, and I remember I'd gotten a Game Boy Advance, and it was the translucent purple edition. And I really, really wanted to get into it. And because if you remember, those Game Boy Advances weren't backlit. Like a lot of the earlier Game Boy series, they just weren't backlit. They were great if you played in the sun with them. Or you had to buy like those crazy springy things with the arms that folded over it and lit little incandescent bulbs, miniature ones down on your screen for, like if you're on a road trip or something, you couldn't play it at night or anything else like that, which is honestly why I loved my Game Gear, because it was a backlit system from Sega. But there was a chance at making my Game Boy Advance something really cool. Cooler than it was. So this kit came out called the Afterburner kit. And a few of you who play video games may remember this. It was offered for a limited time through this one fellow, and I don't even remember how I found him or where it was, but he had a website and it was called the Afterburner Upgrade Kit. And it is an LED light that sits on the outside edges of the screen. And it came with all the components. The only thing you had to do was to drill a small hole on the top or wherever you wanted, and you could replace this switch too. It's just a toggle switch. And I tried to find the most ergonomic place where it would still look very much like, the original sort of thing, like had that whole OEM look. So there, if you recall, there are shoulder buttons on it. I really wish I'd gotten it out of the case now. I probably need to do that just to show you guys in another video. And I just didn't plan this out very well. But so anyway, if you toggle that switch, it turns the light on. And I remember freaking out, like, man, am I going to be able to do that? But I didn't want to miss out on it. I think the whole kit was like $29.99. For some reason, that number sticks in my head. I don't know if that's the right number or not. But nonetheless, you basically had to open up everything, and then you had to peel your screen away from the screen protector, because there's an external screen protector and then the actual physical screen that had mounting tape around the edges of it. Well, the Afterburner kit went in between the two. And essentially, and all the instructions, they were like, you got to treat this like a clean 100 room. You cannot fuck around. If you get lint in there, you're hosed. So I remember scraping the shit out of like a bathroom, just getting it down to like everything. I made it so clean it wasn't even funny. I was like, I can't have anything in here, nothing. And I think I even put on a paper mask. I tied back my hair, everything, just like because I just wanted it to be perfect. And I'm always shooting for that. Everybody wants that thing to be perfect, the thing they're doing. And so I remember that I got everything together, and I'd gotten a little bowl that I set to the side. And the entire time I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, if I fuck this up, I have just messed up a Game Boy Advance, and this is going to be terrible. But I snapped out of it, and I remembered what Mr. Brock let me do in school, back when I was a sophomore. And I thought, you know what? This is going to be okay. I'm going to take what I remember from then. I'm going to make it better this time. It took me about an hour and a half of slowly taking it apart. Now, if you know anything about Nintendo, I think that's the system that has those goddamn tri-wing like releases. And the kit came with a tri-wing screwdriver that I still have, and I got that off. But I think it also depended on where you got your Game Boy. And I got it pulled apart, and it, I had this cutting mat that I was using as kind of my exploratory thing, and I was laying parts out, everything else like that. I think now I'd probably be a little more relaxed about it back then, but you'd swear I was diffusing a fucking bomb. And I'm getting everything taken apart and opening it up and everything, and I was like, shit, where does everything go? And I was like poring over the instructions like it was like I'm like discovering some fucking ancient, Atlantean civilization or something like that. Like, oh, okay. The soldering was pretty easy. I'd gotten a nice solder gun at that point in time, and I'm being really careful, and I'm handling everything with these little tweezers and moving stuff around, so I'm not using my fingers, and touching everything as little as I could. I didn't want to get anything on the screens, and I even watched a video. Now that's the really weird part. I think I remember watching a very low-res video somewhere online. It wasn't on YouTube, of the manufacturing process of them, because I wanted to understand how they were being built. And there was one small clip that was from a news article in Japan where they showed a little bit of them being put together. And I was like, okay, so that was helpful. And I really miss being as resourceful as I was at that point in time, because I really did enjoy it. Even though I was stressing and sweating and like, oh, fuck, I managed to get it together. I remember taking the back component, the back part of the case out, and removing all of the electronics that I had to get out of there, and using a drill, my Hitachi, on a real slow setting and slowly drilling through the plastic. And thankfully I'd done enough so that I understood the tolerance of that, like not to push too hard, you'd crack it, all these other things, just enough to get it in there, and then to thread the toggle switch through, and then leave it in a place where it wasn't going to, entangle with anything else, nor get in the way when I was using the shoulder buttons. And it worked out beautifully. I will pull it out in one of the next videos and show you guys, just as kind of a follow-up, because it came out so beautiful. It really worked out really well. And to this day, it still works. The only thing I ended up doing was losing the back cover, and then I found it when we were just cleaning out my parents' storage shed. It is one of my prides and joy as far as like something that I worked on and I got done. And that was the very first time in my life that it proved to me that we can truly keep growing by remembering where we've been. And if that's anything that I would love to be able to bring on to people, and even when you're feeling at your lowest moments, remember what you've done, because all of that builds character and pushes you forward into a better place. Even if it was some of the most uncomfortable or disturbing shit, like the jobs I've talked about before, like maybe bad social situations I've been in, they all build up who you are. And if you want to become a better person, and you are a better person, you will take those things, move them over into here, pick out what you need, and then let go of the rest. Anyway, that's my story. I really wish I'd had more physical things to show you guys, because that would have been cool, but I guess I'll revisit that later and plan better next time. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will catch you in the next episode.